I think we better start so that we have time for exchange with the participants. So good day to everyone, and thank you for taking your time to join us in this important discussion on advancing a rights-based and ecosystem-based approach to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the Water Action Agenda. This webinar is co-organized by the Indigenous Peoples' Rights International, by the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, and by the Right Energy Partnership. And you may be wondering why this is taking place now. This is actually a so-called side event or an event related to the UN Water Conference taking place here in New York, which started yesterday. And the objective of this conference is to accelerate the implementation of the UN agenda on water relating to sustainable development and combating climate change. As we all know, the SDG 6 calls for access to clean water and sanitation for all. In relation also to climate change, an increasing number of disasters are associated with water: flooding, drought, landslides, biodiversity loss, among others. All these are impacting on indigenous peoples across the world who are in many ways custodian of water bodies, from watershed to rivers, to lakes, and the oceans. For indigenous peoples, water is life, water is sacred, water is sustenance, water is for all generations, not only the present generation, but for the future generation. And water is not a commodity for profit, but a common good to be shared responsibly. This event will highlight the key challenges that indigenous peoples face in relation to sustaining water and water bodies within our territories, and our contributions and solutions to addressing the current global water and climate crisis, which includes highlighting some of the indigenous peoples' natural resource management related to water, and to ensure our access to safe and drinking water and sanitation, and also to renewable energy, and to support the sustainable livelihoods of indigenous communities. I'm quite surprised that there's actually a huge interest on this issue of water now in New York. There were 8,000 registered participants, and I think majority came. And so for the first time here in New York, the place is so full. I mean, yesterday I queued up for 3 hours just to get into the building. So it really demonstrates also the high level interest, and many are from different sectors, from the academe to conservation of organizations, to activists, to women's organizations, youth. And there is we have Pravinda Shakya from the Asia Indigenous Peoples Network on Extractive Industries and Energy, and also the head of SEMSOJ, a local indigenous organization based in Nepal. Just to save time, his short CV will be flashed in the chat box, so we get to know more of Pravin. So Pravin, you can take the floor now.
Yes, thank you, Zohan. And Zojalapa, namaste. Good evening from this side of the world to everyone. Talking about hydropower dams, I think the situation in Asia and in many regions of the world is quite comparable. There is a great push by governments in the name of just transitions to promulgate, to plan, and to implement mega dams and a cascade of dams that significantly affect our waters, our water resources, particularly the rivers. While smaller dams have been useful for many communities, the push for these mega dams and particularly mega dams and cascade of dams have been particularly concerning for indigenous peoples who have close relationship with these water resources, not only for their livelihoods or in terms of their economy, but also for their identity. At the same time, what we also see is there is regional push, or regional integration in terms of hydropower development. We see that there are programs or projects or plans pushed or promoted through international financial institutions such as Asian Development Bank in the name of South Asia sectoral energy connectivity. At the same time, dams and interconnection lines or transmission lines being connected at the ASEAN regional level, with countries such as Laos being called the battery house or the battery of Asia. The problems with these is, again, the scale of development for these dams, or the scale in which these dams or mega dams or hydropower projects are planned, are often do not commensurate the impacts that they make on local communities or the affected communities, particularly indigenous communities, to the benefits that they give to these communities. And on top of that, the other challenge that the indigenous peoples face in many countries in Asia is that there is lack of recognition, official recognition of indigenous peoples as indigenous peoples, or like collectives with their rights in the laws and constitutions of these countries. And even in countries such as Philippines or Nepal or Cambodia, where they are recognized as indigenous peoples, and with certain rights, with some rights, their rights are not fully implemented or ignored in the name of development or hydropower, including in the name of hydropower development. In this context, what we see is that I would like to categorize, or I would like to summarize the impacts in five specific topics. The first being, and the first primary challenge, and this is the root challenge, being the lack of participation of indigenous peoples in designing these dams or developing or planning these hydropower projects. We see that indigenous peoples are given limited information about these hydropower plants or hydropower development plans, and even when these projects have come through from the central level governments, or from the federal governments, they are provided little information since the design, or since the beginning of the project, let alone their free, prior, and informed consent be taken for development of these projects. So the first challenge, I think the primary challenge, is the lack of is the utter disrespect for the need to obtain the free, prior, and informed consent of the concerned indigenous peoples that will be affected by these dams. The second challenge, and I think again this is again a crucial challenge that comes with the implementation of hydropower projects, is the disposition of lands and resources of the communities through inundation, or or those communities that live in the downstream of the dams. No? After being dispossessed, they are pushed, they are involuntarily displaced, or they forcibly have to migrate from their lands and resources, and that brings additional challenges to their lives. That is, when they have to move to a new place. The third challenge, again, is often overlooked by many hydropower projects or hydropower developers, as well as the governments of the people, because they often do not fully relate to it. That is the loss of culture and identity of the peoples because of the development of these hydropower projects. As Joan already said, water resources are not just a commodity for indigenous peoples. It is life. It is associated with their identity. In Nepal, we have an indigenous group called Majis, who they live along the Kosi River, which is the major river in Nepal, and they often associate themselves with the river in the relationship of uncle and nephew. So they call the river uncle and they call themselves nephew. But with the promulgation of cascade of dams on Koshi River, these communities have been displaced and are still going to be displaced with new dams being developed. No, particularly new dams being developed to export energy to India and Bangladesh. I think we have a similar situation in ASEAN where dams are being developed on Mekong River again. And while Mekong River is not just a source of fishes or livelihood for many indigenous communities, Mekong River dependent communities, it's also a source of identity for the communities that live along the Mekong River. So the loss of culture and identity is often overlooked, and it is a severe impact for indigenous peoples. The fourth impact that I would like to highlight here, and this is again a very concerning challenge that is growing worse by the day, is the impacts on indigenous human rights defenders. Indigenous defenders, when they lead their communities against these destructive, ill-planned hydropower projects, are targeted, they are harassed, they have to face undue pressure, and worse, they are even killed or disappeared. We already have the story of Makling, I forget, this indigenous elder from the Philippines, who was shot dead by the Philippine military in the 80s when he led his communities against the Chico Dam. So the situation is not different today too. In Philippines, in Nepal, particularly in countries such as Philippines and India, indigenous communities are facing significant backlash, reprisals through judicial harassment, through threats, through other retaliations, when they lead their communities against destructive dams that displace them. In India, in India, most of the mega dams are being proposed or planned in Northeast India, where there is significant indigenous population, or it is predominantly populated by indigenous groups. And the final impact, and I'll stop after this, and I think this will also give a good segue to the following speaker, is the environmental impacts of these dams. Again, the hydropower development has been touted as clean and green by hydropower companies and association of hydropower companies such as the International Hydropower Association, that include companies of the likes of Sino Hydro, Power China, Indian Hydropower Association, among others. But they often do not fully disclose that these dams are being developed through unethical practices, with significant impacts on the local communities. And according to a study in 2016, methane emissions from hydropower reservoirs in tropical regions account for more than 4% of all human-caused climate change. So we should also be aware that these hydropower dams, or particularly reservoir-type projects, big reservoir-type projects, might not be as clean and green as they are touted to be. So I think I've given this overview. With this, I'll stop now and look forward to the discussion later. Thank you, Zoan.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that, Praveen. So we just proceed with the next and have some discussions later. We will now have a presentation on the water-related disaster, water-related to disasters and climate change. So this will be presented by Elias Sakau from the Indigenous Livelihood Enhancement Partners from Kenya. So Elias, you have the floor. Sorry, Elias?
Yes, thank you. Enda suventumo aerogentai endedeganya sidai. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to you all. Yeah, my name is Elias, as has been mentioned, and I'll be talking on the experiences of the indigenous communities in Kenya on the current ongoing drought in the Horn of Africa. So we've all heard it in the news, and we've seen it even in international media towards the end of last year, that there is a devastating drought that is affecting people in the Horn of Africa, including Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia, and even Sudan. So yesterday I was shocked because I was in a side event, which was hosted by the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the East African representative of the FAO in East Africa mentioned that, and in their own estimations by FAO, there is a loss of in excess of 60 million livestock lost within that region, within the time frame. And just to put it into context is that towards the end of last year, when this was really like in the news, we had it at, the drought was being recorded as the worst in, it started as the worst in a decade, and then it went to the worst in 2 decades. It went to, you know, by the end of last year, the worst in 40 years. And today, as we speak, it's still breaking records as the worst in 60 years. And I don't know for how long or how many more records it's going to break. But just to give you a context of the indigenous people in Kenya, to be specific, is that the indigenous people of Kenya comprises 3 groups or 3 communities. First, we have the pastoralist communities, and then we have the hunter-gatherers, and then we have the fisher folks. And the population of the indigenous people in Kenya is, like, for example, the pastoralist communities themselves are totaling about 25% of the population before you even add the other smaller groups. So this is significantly a large population of the country. Of course, you could use the population to, you know, assess the GDP or what we bring on the table in terms of development and all that. So what has been going on is that we featured in the news the late last year, and everyone was focusing on the drought in Kenya, the drought specifically in northern Kenya, and then in southern Kenya, that is the Narok and Kajiado. And then all of a sudden we went out of the news and no one is talking about it. But the reality is, up until this week, when we traveled to the New York Water Conference, it hasn't rained yet. Yet no one is giving attention to the fact that we have animals dying. We have people who are livelihoods have been threatened, you know. And it's sad because even the national government itself isn't responsive to the problems that we have. And you know, sometimes when you look at the setup of governments, is that there is legislation to protect these people. For example, in the Kenyan Constitution, we have the Bill of Rights that protects everyone, especially, and it's from Article 19 to Article 56, I think. And then Article 56 is like for the affirmative action, you know, that the representation and everything for these marginalized and indigenous communities. We also have the right to resources, you know, right to own and, you know, protect these resources. We also have like the recognition of indigenous people and their ways, culture, spiritual, you know, and cultural. So we are all, I mean, the setup, the legislative and policy setup is there, but the recognition part, I mean, and the implementation part is the problem, you know. There are social programs and ways in which the government is responding to these droughts, but they are not really dedicated to the indigenous people, for that matter. We had a program that was rolled out by the government that is providing subsidized fertilizers. And in the middle of the drought, no one is planting, but they are giving fertilizers. You look at the impact of that fertilizer, it's really not there because we need the rains to plant. Furthermore, the pastoralist communities are not like, you know, farmers. So there were no measures put in place for the pastoralist communities to adapt to this. So yeah, it's really sad that we're experiencing this and we seem to be alone in this. But nevertheless, there are communities in Kenya, especially the pastoralist communities, have always adapted and had proven ways over generations on how to actually cope to this changing drought and climate, and also how we use our resources, especially water. For example, one of the frowned upon strategies that we use as indigenous people is like, or the pastoralist communities is moving from one place to another. We are a nomadic community. And the aspect of nomadism are like, for one, we go for greener pastures, two, we follow where the water is, and three is for not to over extract resources, because as indigenous people, we do not accumulate. We use sustainably what is required of the moment, but we don't like store for, and that goes for water too. We don't have like major water harvesting technologies. Is that when this well dries, we go to the next and we move to the next, or we follow the river downstream. And this is seen as backward, not, I don't know. But for us, it is sustainable. It shapes the ecosystem. It gives the part that we've moved from to regenerate. And also it reduces our footprint on the environment. For example, if you stay for one place, even as a single person, within 2, 3, 4 months, then your marks will start to be seen on the environment. So we also reduce our footprint on the environment by moving from one place to another. That means we less pollute the water sources, we less pollute the land, and we give it time to regenerate. But this is seen differently by other stakeholders.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to sum up, I have a few pictures to just shed light to the current situation that we're facing, or the grim reality of the things we're seeing in Kenya. So this is intergenerational wealth. These are livestock from one farm. You can see that. Barely a few standing. And now they're being moved by trucks and being buried because even the vultures cannot keep up with the dead animals. This is in northern Kenya. It's a current situation. Nothing has changed. The rains are yet to fall. And just last week, it started raining in my village. And this is an image from Kajiado. I wish I could enlarge this. Kajiado. This is my neighboring county. And because of the drought, the severity and the loss of livestock, parents are now going for the school feeding programs with their kids. They're following their kids to school to eat. It's nothing to eat. We've lost all the livestock. It's sad, but it's the reality. These are people taking the animals to the market to try and sell them, but you end up not getting a buyer, and they die in the market.
Yeah.
And this is not because of lack of pasture, I must say, but lack of water. And some of the reasons why we're lacking water as downstream users, so pastoralist communities, is because of the destruction of the water catchment areas like the Mao Forest, which is still the land and is used and protected by the Maasai people. But the encroachment is killing reducing the flow of water. And this one is the last picture, which was taken, I think, a week ago. There was a heavy downpour for the first time, and in one part of Kajiado County, and the livestock were too weak to withstand the downpour, and they're dying in hundreds. So again, when there is hope, everything is also like dying with the fast downpour.
Okay.
And lastly, the drying up riverbeds. This is the Wasonyiro River, which is the largest river in the northern part of the pastoral communities, has exposed its riverbed. And now there is sand mining. This is it. If you can see the trucks down there. They are mining sand, which is unregulated, and it's on our pastoral communities' land, and the government is doing nothing. And then this is now disturbing the flow downstream for people who are coming to, accessing the same resource. So yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for that, Elias. I think you really hammered the point on the nomadic lifestyle as a sustainable lifestyle based on the reciprocal relations of a pastoralist with their animals and the environment. And I sincerely express our solidarity with all those suffering from the severe drought. And you have illustrated that this kind of crisis affects the most vulnerable and the most marginalized, and pushing us further into a question already of survival, together also with the animals. So it really shows with the photos that you've seen the severity of the problem, and we hope that that situation will really be addressed in this UN water conference. So thanks a lot, Elias. Now we move to Latin America. We have our speaker from Ecuador to be talking on mining and water pollution. So we have Leonidas Salazar from the Confederación de Nacionalidades Indígenas del Ecuador, or CONAIE. Is Leonidas with us now? Leonidas? Hello? I think Leonidas, there, Leonidas, okay. Yeah, please use the interpretation button. He will be speaking in Spanish. Leonidas, you have to put it there. Okay, we hear you now.
Un abrazo al mundo.
Hi, greetings, everybody. Greetings to all nationalities, to all indigenous peoples, to all human beings. It's a pleasure to be here, and I would like to share you our experience from Ecuador. We are a small country in Latin America, and we are experiencing a conflict with extractivism. These activities started about 40 to 60 years ago. Oil companies came to our country and started exploiting it. Now we have the mining industry also present here, and both experiences drawn from these activities are very painful for us. So that's why I would like to talk to you about this in my speech today. First off, mining industry in Ecuador started 1994, more or less, with a law from the IMF that imposed governments to allow the presence of this kind of industries. So from that point on, there were more laws adapted that safeguarded the continuity of these kind of industries in our country. Up to date, we have about 8% of the national country occupied by this kind of industry, whether by exploiting it or occupying it or exploring it. So we have seen how many water resources have started disappearing among the years or have been polluted. So we ended last year with a huge strike from the indigenous peoples. We wanted to talk to the government about the mining industry in our country. And this is for us a need. We talked about the previous consultations. For us, this is a must. We want to talk to the government so that these consultations are guaranteed by law. So in this case, these industries, these companies should conduct a consultation, even though they only want to explore the lands. So currently in Ecuador, we have 11 projects going on that means that these companies and also for the public institutions such as the police and the government end up being kind of like the security guards of this industry and of these companies. This has led to violence and has led to threats from their side to ours. We have a conflict on the field. We've seen 2 points drawn from this model. On the one side, we have the government. The government promotes itself at a global scale, saying, yeah, we have a small country and only 8% of the land has been explored. And in Canada, on March 6th, the government even promoted the possibility of further exploration of our land. And we have lost audio connection with the speaker. We cannot hear him well. It's too low to be translated. I cannot hear him well. I'm sorry.
Can somebody, Ada, can you try to tell Leonidas to for the volume? Sorry about this. We're having some technical problems.
Leonidas, compañero Leonidas, dejamos de escucharlo. Su volumen está muy bajo.
Yeah, can the interpreter hear now? We can hear a bit.
No, I'm afraid it's not enough to translate. I can barely hear him.
Ada, what can we do?
I think he's not hearing us.
Yeah,
Leonidas,
there's a suggestion for the interpreter to send him a chat message if he can see that.
of course.
Yeah, he's talking about the contamination. Leonidas, we cannot hear you. Leonidas, the interpreter cannot hear you. Ada, can you? Yeah, Ada, can you tell him?
I sent him some messages.
No, he's listening now. I think he knew that.
Compañero Leonidas, dejamos de escucharlo. Se bajó mucho el volumen desde que estaba hablando.
Leonidas, we haven't been able to hear you. The volume, the signal became very weak since you started talking about the Canadian government.
No, se oye muy lejos, compañero.
We hear you as if from a distance.
Sí, se bajó el volumen.
Yeah, I think he has to get closer to the microphone or.
Sí, no sé si se trata de que se acerque al micrófono, quizá.
Can you get closer to the microphone, perhaps?
No lo escuchamos, compañero. Su micrófono está apagado, me parece.
We can't hear you, your friend.
Ahí está bien, ahí está bien. Ya lo escuchamos bien.
We can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Sí, lo escuchamos, compañero.
Ok. Entonces, por otro lado,
And so another thing is we have local regions with problems in 4 particular areas, zones that are origins of hydro resources. We're talking about páramos, where there is a large presence of water. We're talking about the source of water that irrigates water that guarantees national production. And so the first impact has to do with the páramos, where the water is being contaminated and is ruining the water cycle. The second issue is the territory. The productive zones in Ecuador, thanks to its productive capacity of the earth and of the agricultural workers, we produce our own sustainability. 60% of everything that is consumed in Ecuador is produced in Ecuador. And so there is a result, an impact in the productive zones in Ecuador, by which or through which, where mining cannot replace the most important productive activity of Ecuadorians, because agricultural, cattle herding is 20.5 of the gross product of Ecuador. The other element is the territory of indigenous populations, where contained between the Sierra and the coast, from the Amazon to the coast. This is the subtropic region. Mother Nature is very wise, and in these regions, the majority of these territories where we have mining activities are connected to the indigenous population's territory. And it doesn't impact just the production. It's not just about water, but also impacts the cultural relation that we have with water, the spiritual dimension of water, how we understand the four sacred territories of the indigenous populations. Then the fourth element, we could say, has to do with protected areas and the mining activities therein. In order to adjust to this new phenomenon of extractivist enterprises, going from oil exploitation to mining exploitation, they have used all of the legislative procedures so that they can provide resources to the world. And so the indigenous populations are being impacted by all of the entire situation. Since 2022, based on statistics of the government, we see that we have exported $20 million, where only $20 billion, where only 80 million of those has entered. This means that 94% of what comes from the mining industry is not favoring Ecuadorians, but rather the multinationals and not Ecuadorians. And so what I'm saying here is that the mining enterprises within indigenous territories, this is not an option that helps indigenous populations. It's not generating a productive result. It's just bringing contamination and death, and it's impacting global sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leonidas, for stressing the impacts of mining or extractive industries to water and to indigenous peoples. I think the presentation on how bad the situation is in relation to contamination, but also presenting the sustainable livelihoods of indigenous peoples is important, and that the mining is not giving benefits to indigenous peoples and instead causing more problems and destruction of water bodies. Now that's we have heard the three presentation on the challenges that indigenous peoples face in relation to water, and this includes, of course, the the destruction of water bodies, like the fragmentation of rivers by dams, which was explained by Pravin in terms of its impacts, and now also the problems of drought, also because of the destruction of the sources of water and compounded by climate change, and now the severe pollution and contamination of water bodies by the activities of the extractive industries, oil and mining and gas in Ecuador. Now I open the floor for some questions before we move on to the next on the practices of sustainable water governance by indigenous peoples. So you can use the Q&A button, or just raise your hand or speak out so I can hear you and call you. So these are the three ways that you can raise your question, or even share briefly your comments or feedback. Anyone? Any reaction, reflections on the first three speakers? We have a shy participants. Or you're still absorbing the very substantive and powerful presentations by all our speakers. Just to say that it really resonates to a lot of indigenous peoples across the world, whether in the experience on dams is the same in other parts, or the one presented on the mining is also the same in Asia, the same in Africa. And the drought is really the whole of the African continent is experiencing that severe problem, and it's really the indigenous peoples who are at the margins, and the lack of government response is really starking, and they're practically living people just die with their animals, which is really wanting global attention. Okay.
Hi,
Yeah.
John. There
Yes.
are two questions on the question
Chat.
answer.
Okay, that's good. So thank you. The whole UN conference is heavily influenced by corporatized water policy and corporation nature-based solutions. How to challenge this trend? Yes, that's right. And then what concrete action on ecosystems will you recommend to the conference from a rights perspective? Okay, anyone from the speaker who wants to respond to this? The heavy influence of corporations, basically, and promoting their own nature-based type of solution. How do we challenge this? And then the second is on ecosystems. What concrete recommendations do we want to put? Any response?
I can comment.
Okay.
I can make a brief response, John, if you allow.
Yeah. Take the floor, Pravin.
Yes, I think this is a common challenge that we have been seeing in a number of UN processes. The same challenge where fossil fuel companies are trying to dominate the discussion with regards to climate change negotiations. Similarly, the private sector coming in heavily in the SDG discussions. We very recently, just yesterday, we concluded the South Asia UN South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights. I think there was a strong push or strong lobby from the corporates in the South Asia Forum on Business and Human Rights too. I think in all these processes, while we have to be our strongest voice, we have to raise our strongest voice to push back. I think the other thing that one other thing that we can do is to make our governments accountable. I mean, because these governments often they are in bed with these corporate actors too. But I think they are our voices, or they are our representatives in these processes. So I think the biggest challenge there would be our biggest ally, or let's say even our biggest challenge there would be to make these governments accountable. The one and other ally or other channel that we can use is also the international organizations, because again, these organizations that are paid with our taxes should also not only be looking at business interests, but also the interests of the people. But yeah, this has been a challenge altogether. And I think with regards to the concrete actions on ecosystems, I think we will be discussing in the following session, whereby indigenous-led energy solutions are being discussed, which we have also been, promoting in our work with APNI. Yeah? And just one just last few seconds is, I think the issue with sand mining, riverbed mining, and the issue with pollution of water resources due to mining or like extractive industries that was shared by our colleagues from Africa and Latin America is also very common in various Asian countries. Again, this is a common challenge for indigenous peoples across the world, and we need to fight this together.
Thank you, Praveen. Elias or Leonidas, do you want to quickly also share your response to those questions? On the
Sí.
Okay. We have Leonidas.
I believe that having participation in these last two events, whether it's in response to environmental climate change or water impacts, I believe that if we continue with the same strategies, we're coming from different regions of the world, sharing our concerns, but the fact that these concerns do not transform themselves into demands or solutions in terms of policy, which are obligatory for the states, then we end up having just justifications. They serve as justifications, and this is a shame. I believe that the participation of the regions that are in conflict, participation of indigenous people, we need to find a mechanism in the United Nations so that these concerns become a demand that are obligatory. We cannot continue in the same way, in the same fashion. We see that the world is ending, that the territories are deteriorating, and so is the planet. And the spaces around the world, or the space to deal with environmental change and sustainability, these are just becoming lobbying spaces that are ultimately negotiated away. It can't be the case that those that contaminate the world, that are exploiting our territories, that they not know our demands, and that they must be forced to engage differently. And because the struggles and the territories, rather than becoming legitimate and legal resistances, rather they're being transformed into illegal campaigns. They're being criminalized and stigmatized, even to the point of having the leaders killed. In our country, more than 150 of our colleagues that represent Mother Nature and the human rights and the rights of water are being processed in the courts with any excuse that the Constitution will allow. And so that's why I think it's important to look into that. Now, if the states are currently, or excuse me, if the global north, the United States and Europe, if they have validated and used the global debt, the national debt of the South, this allows them to continue to exploit our territory. And so what's happening is that the governments are just selling away our resources, whether it's nature or oil, in vulnerable, and they pay off the national debt through this way. And so it's up to us to protect the paramos, the nature, the water. And so we need to have a demand as through a mechanism, something that allows national debts to be shunned as
Yeah.
a validation to carry on with these
Yeah.
extractivist enterprises
Okay.
that impact
Yes.
us, because our governments
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
want
Leonidas,
to
yeah.
be seen negatively by the northern
Yeah.
governments.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry for that, Leonidas.
Leonidas.
Yeah. So thanks for that. Elias, any quick response? Because
Yes, thank you. Very quick. On the what concrete action on ecosystems will you recommend to the conference from the rights perspective? I think one is when we're talking about ecosystems, they already know where these ecosystems are, and they're in indigenous people lands. So we need to remind them that these ecosystems they're talking about are in indigenous people territories. Two, that indigenous people have rights, enshrined in the UNDRIP and other, supporting policies, be it national and what, and they should be respected. Then, and the other one is in these ecosystems, we have IPs and we have traditional knowledge that has proven to work within our communities and territories for generations, and that should be respected and applied when they are looking at the rights perspective to this ecosystem. Thank you very much. And of course, the last one is that we see water not just as a resource, but also as a spiritual and cultural and even an identity as indigenous people. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that, Elia. So I think the response, just to capture, is in terms of changing the narrative or behavior of companies, is that there should be clear demand for accountability, and to regulate and impose sanctions to the activities of corporations. And I believe that a policy of no-go zones should also be declared. And I also think that mandatory due diligence and effective grievance mechanisms should be a requirement, and greater participation of indigenous peoples in the UN system and in other intergovernmental and national processes. That their meaningful participation also means accounting for their interests, their rights, and also their welfare. And also in terms of the ecosystem protection, is the recommendation is that there needs to be a recognition of the rights and knowledge of indigenous peoples as stewards of ecosystems, and that the ecosystems should be treated not as a commodity, but with cultural values to indigenous peoples. So with that, we need to move on, or we can have further discussions at the end, but we still have two speakers. So I would like for us to proceed then to now the solutions from indigenous peoples for sustainable water management. So our first speaker is from Malaysia, who will be presenting the supporting access to energy and sustainable resource management as the experiences and practices of indigenous communities in Malaysia. So we have Rojika Mahin from the Pacos Trust. Again, I just to mention that the background of our speakers are put in the chat box, so you get to know more of our speakers. So I now call on I now call on Rojika.
Yes, thank you, Joanne. And Kapisanangan, good morning and good evening, everyone. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
So for me, as a indigenous people, actually we have a unique and valuable perspective on sustainable water management, because we've been living in harmony with the natural environment for ages. So we also have our own traditional knowledge, which is also include the practices and also the values that prioritize the protection and also the preservation of water resources. So in terms of supporting the community through energy and sustainable resources management, we've been working with a few community who has installed the community-based microhydro system. So a microhydro is a renewable energy technology which is used to generate electricity using a flowing water with generation capacity below 100 kilowatts. So this is the system where it's designed as a run-off river system, which does not require construction of large dams for water storage. And the microhydro system also rely on the available of flow of the river. Hence, it's also rely on the watershed to sustain the water flow. So this is the sustainability, the operation of the microhydro system also rely very much of the availability of the adequate water discharge, which is through whole the year, and a well-conserved forest in watershed area where is the microhydro system installed will ensure the sufficient water resources availability throughout the year. So the land conversion in watershed also actually will cause the decrease of water discharge during a dry season. So
la producción de esta energía.
Can disrupt the operation of the microhydro. So we can see that also the utilization of the water resources for other purposes beside microhydro, such as the agriculture. There is also the plantation, fishery, and other water supply from the same watershed must be have to avoided. And regulation for water resources use is necessary to ensure the continuous the electricity supply to that community. And the other one is we can see that land use management within the watershed area is also important, which is most of the community also they are still or the indigenous peoples in our areas, they're still practicing the shifting cultivation. And if any disturbance in the watershed area, particularly opening for agriculture activities, can also cause the land degradation. And the land degradation on the upstream of watershed will affect the hydrology condition in a way that it's also disrupt the sustainability of the existing where the microhydro also installed. So we can see also that heavy rain can cause flood and landslide that can severely damage the civil structure that have been built. And this also caused also by natural disaster generally require high of the maintenance, like if we are building the microhydro. So in this community that we have been working that already installed microhydro, they have their own management in monitoring their territories, which is called Tagal. So the Tagal system is riverine customary practice by the indigenous peoples of Sabah, around Sabah. So Tagal means no in a Kadazan Dusun language, which is, it's a concept that Tagal system emphasize collective governance and responsibility for the conservation of the resources and maintenance of the indigenous value. So this system also is also divide the rivers into different zone, which is a green zone that can be used by everyone, and yellow zone, it's also used for a restricted time, which is community. There is a community that need a fish, maybe like a pregnant women or the women that had just given a birth, or maybe there is a certain requirement for that spiritual. And the red zone is totally protected area where even no fishing is allowed. So the element of Tagal is actually a community practice, which is promotes a conservation and opportunity to the community for alternative livelihood. It has also spiritual elements and promotes traditional governance and transfer of knowledge. So we have the Tagal system, and it actually also applies the concept of Gompiguna, or we can say use and protect. So the Gompiguna concept is ensure that the natural resources are utilized in a sustainable manner, where the communal ownership of the resources and the practice of taking only is needed from the natural environment. So even though the Tagal system and also the Gompigona, that it has been widely used and recognized in protection of fish resources in the rivers in Sabah, but the same system can also be applied to protect other resources such as the forest. So through this, in the community also, they also have developed the community protocol on water catchment, which is very important for the community, that ensuring the continuity of management and protection of water catchment, which is it's continued by the next generation. So it's also the community protocol also used to practice and will do as a guide for community and other community in fighting for the sustainability of water catchment area, where true management and protection based on the traditional management or knowledge and practices are more commonly known as like the Gompigona concept. So acknowledgement of role and contribution of indigenous peoples in conservation practices is also respecting and protecting the rights of IP lands and territories and resources, where it's also sustain the community livelihood and well-being. I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rojika. That's very clear presentation of a model of an ecosystems approach by indigenous peoples by exercising also our rights. And it's important that you have highlighted the sustainable collective management of and governance of indigenous peoples of water resources, and even defining regulations on the behavior of communities in using these water bodies. At the same time, also enhancing sustainable use of water to meet the needs of indigenous communities, like building microhydro, but also making sure that the resources are protected and managed well. So that's I think it ties up very clearly to our the things that we want to highlight in terms of the practices of indigenous peoples in resource management, with key principles that has to be replicated if we really want to have good management of resources and water governance. So thank you, Rojika. Now we move on to our brother from India, who will now be talking on marine. So Johnson Jament, he's an associate from the Association of Artisanal Fishers in India, will present to us the promoting sustainable use of marine resources. So we're moving now to another form of resource, water resource. So I now give the floor to Johnson. So Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the ocean resource as a big ecosystem, and how has the indigenous people and coastal indigenous people in South India, Mukwa community, how we are actually try to use sustainably these resources over the years. So I will also address some of the questions raised by our participants in my presentation. So a number of things we are doing. The first thing we did, this documentation, both visual and printed documentation. Actually all three levels of documentation: printed documentation, visual and audio documentation. Through documentations, we are covering two important aspects in relation to ecosystem management. One is the long history of resistance of our people to protect the resources over the centuries. Who has the long history of resistance? Indigenous people have the long history of resistance against a lot of practices. So we have to document, and we have to document that strong and positive messages and the successful resistance against those colonialists and also present some industrialists, etc. That is very needed to inspire our people. Unfortunately, in some cases, I also see in our context in India, people lose the rhythm of resistance. So because of they're fed up, we have done this. In order to do that, we have to tell the history in the past. If I look at the history of India from my context, we actually fought against two important colonialists like Dutch when they tried to build their empire in 1741. The coastal people, indigenous coastal community in South India, both Tamil Nadu and Kerala, in India, they fought against these people. They won the war. But this is not documented very well to inspire our people. And also against British as well. That is one level of thing. The other thing is indigenous knowledge and practices. That is the documentation also needed. We now try to call indigenous science, which is some cases, especially in the local related resources, this science is much superior to existing scientific concepts. I can give a lot of examples. We don't have time to leave that here at the moment. So this is also very important. So then that enable us to work with the scientists, scientific community. So we have this negotiation. See, you consider the science in this way. Most of their scientific approach is actually species-oriented science. So protection of some species. But we say that if you don't protect the ecosystem, how can you protect the species? So learn from us. We have the science of ecosystem-based knowledge and science. So we, based on our knowledge, we have to protect the ecosystem to live away from the destruction. So that's the way we can actually contribute to them. Then, therefore, we have to build human resources within our indigenous communities. We are building that. We are building scientists from the indigenous communities. I have seen that we have a lot of activism, a lot of anthropology, lot of thinking and language documentation, etc. But we have limited number of scientists in comparison to others. I mean, especially the other scientific. So we need scientists from our community based on our knowledge to negotiate with these people, because most often these governments and the established mainstream scientists work together. We can see examples in our communities, they work against ecosystem. So they destroy ecosystem. So that is a third element I want to talk. And indigenous media also very important. We also try to build indigenous media because our stories, our knowledge, language, practices, our connection with the ecosystem, spirituality, everything need to be visible. I mean, need to be there, out there. People have to have their reference. So therefore, the indigenous media will actually bring those elements. Then the fifth point is entrepreneurship. We have to build entrepreneurship as well. So we are trying to build, we are looking at the different issues, the activism-based issues. Then can we make these activism-based issues into a social business model, like a social entrepreneurship? So in order to provide jobs and also solve the issues we are currently facing. For example, we don't have indigenous media people, so how can we build, provide an opportunity for them to engage in media activism? Yeah, so that way they get the entrepreneurship. The AIPP, Asian Indigenous Peoples Pact, actually support this kind of interventions. And the sixth elements is participation in every aspect related to our lives, our everything related to our lives and livelihood and etc. ecosystem, water management, governance system. We have to participate any small or high level of negotiations with the government, non-government, UN system like this we do now. So we should be visible there, like we are visible here in the water conference. Then people talk about us. So that visibility is needed. The final element is actually, we are thinking a lot about the climate adaptation mitigation, but we also need to think about the technological adaptation as well. So we need to equip with the technology. So there are a lot of technologies are coming. So we have to adapt the technology to protect, not to destroy our ecosystem, to protect our ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive, if I may say. But what I like to highlight in what you mentioned is the documentation of a strong resistance. I think we're not very conscious of doing that, which is, as you mentioned, is very important, because it reminds us of the collective struggles of our indigenous brothers, our ancestors, that we need to continue that fight to protect our lives and to protect the environment. The other one is the idea that, and it's true, you've really hammered it, that scientific approach is only looking at species and not looking at the reciprocal relations of indigenous peoples with our environment. So we're out of the scene, when in fact we should be at the center of the scene, right? So that will also help us change the narrative that it's only scientists know, but in fact we know. and that's where indigenous knowledge, as you said. But I dare to say, instead of saying developing scientists amongst us, is that indigenous communities are scientists with the knowledge that they have. We're just traditional knowledge vis-a-vis science. It should not be the case, because science is founded on traditional knowledge, on indigenous knowledge. So we shouldn't be making that dichotomy between science and indigenous knowledge. They are all important, and the source, in fact, is traditional knowledge, and that should be acknowledged as central, right? As central on the way we protect not only the environment, but the stewards of the environment, like in indigenous peoples. And finally, and this is the thread from all our speakers, that indigenous peoples need to be participating, meaningful participation in all decision-making processes that affects us. And that is critically important on the issue of water governance and the protection of water, and even the use of technologies, as you have mentioned, and even the use of, and management, but also taking into account already the sustainable practices, values, and management systems that we have. So thank you for you and all the participants. I'm just trying to capture what have been discussed. And now we still have a few minutes for discussions to engage with our participants. So again, I would encourage you to ask your questions in the Q&A. And then, now I see a question. There is an emerging discourse led by CSOs on the rights of rivers. While this trend comes from a good place, indigenous peoples must be part of this discourse, but we are missing in it. There is only one case where we are included. For example, the Wanganui River in New Zealand, whereby I believe the Maori were given the status of stewards, custodians of the river. Besides this good example, we do not have any other example whereby indigenous peoples are included. Would like to know the view of the speakers on the narrative on the rights of rivers, whereby a legal status identity is given to a river. That's one. And the other one I saw in the chat is, let me see. So while I'm looking for that, the other, and I think this may go to Leonidas, could language from the Escazú Agreement be in the Water Conference outcome document to ensure transparency, accountability, and access to justice? So these are the questions that I've seen so far. Please point out to me if I missed anything, but just to quickly engage with our speakers who wants to respond to that question on the right of rivers. Any reflection among
Yeah,
our speakers? Okay, Johnson, you
sorry.
can take the floor, and then the others can. Yeah, kindly be quick because we only have a few minutes left.
Yeah, I think we need to give the right to all the ecosystems, including rivers. But we also need to think that before that, we need to link the connection between the indigenous people and the ecosystems. Otherwise, what happened in the basis of conservation, they will be given rights to rivers and other ecosystem, then we'll be asked to not to do anything there. So
Yeah.
it will destroy our cultural and customary practices. So before that, we need to establish our customary rights over our natural resources. Then, of course, the rights of these ecosystems. Thank you.
Okay, that's a very concise but to the point response. Praveen and Rajika.
I'll just be very quick. I second Johnson that, you know, firstly, the rights of communities over these resources should be established before the rights of the resources themselves. But just to also correct that, in Bangladesh also, the court there have declared that all rivers in Bangladesh have the same rights as human. I mean, rivers are legal person in Bangladesh too. So basically, it's a growing trend. But I think, as the person who has put the question has pointed out, indigenous peoples and the river dependent communities should not be left out of this discourse when rivers are granted rights.
Thank you, Praveen. Rajika, you want to say something on this?
Yeah, from that perspective, from our side, like in Malaysia, specifically in Sabah, because some of the good practices has been recognized by the government, but it's still really hard to work with them, because some of the, even though there is a law there, but most of the enactment which supports the recognition of the IP in Sabah, it's not fully implemented and enforced actually. So I think there is a need also to review and also understanding again the policies or whatever it's related to that human rights violation. So I think the other one is also the partnership is also really important, that we can have a partnership with different stakeholders, with others, related for this one. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Rajika. Anyone else or any parting words also from you? Because we now are down to 3 minutes at the end of our session. And if there's anyone also among our participants who wants to quickly share some reflections. Okay, Leonidas, can you quickly respond to the Escazú question? Is that relevant for water management or governance?
Sí, me parece uno de los temas centrales para
Yes, I think this is a central issue for the peoples in the continent and in the Caribbean.
Okay.
The main objective of Escazú is to guarantee the implementation, an effective and total control. If the companies have had the privilege of having the information in their desks, in their offices, right? I mean, here, private information. And so I think it's important that we demand an accord that the Escazú should be respected, so that the communities have access to information, and to make information public, states should have that obligation. And so that the control is not reserved just for private enterprises. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Leonidas. And we're down to our last minute. So Elias, any parting words or any comment from you before we conclude? Anything from, okay, Elias?
Yeah, just that indigenous people rights, and especially the rights to water, is an equal right as any other right. And as indigenous people, we should not be ashamed to fight for it and push our governments and all the stakeholders to honor that. Thank you.
Okay, and if there's any important message from anyone, just a quick one from anyone from our participants and speakers before I finally conclude. Any important message that has not been presented in this discussion? If not, then I think we've reached our time, and I thank all the speakers for their very important contributions. I think with the experiences as well as the recommendations made on actions needed, and also showcasing the good practices of indigenous peoples is something that this conference should reflect upon and considers, especially the sustainable resource management practices of indigenous peoples, the reciprocal relations that we have with water bodies and water resources, that we shouldn't be taken away from that our knowledge should also be part of it, that we need to be included in all decision-making bodies relating to water, and also anything that will affect us as indigenous peoples, and that we need to look beyond water just as a resource, because they are not just as a resource, they are a source of identity. They are it's a source of spirituality. It's a source for the survival of the future generations, and that the practices actually, or the problems like the pollution, the challenges that has been identified should be addressed. We should not there should be political will to make those destroyers, to make those polluters account. There should be political will to put policies in upholding rights, but also for sustainable use of resources, and participation in decision-making by rights holders and not just as stakeholders, because our rights is the one at stake in the decision-making. Our survival, our identity, our knowledge is at stake in the decisions that will come out from this UN Water Conference. So I hope we have made our messages clear. And again, thank you to all our participants. Thank you for taking time to join this important discussion. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to the interpreters who, of course, has enabled us to understand each other. And thank you also to the organizers of this event. And we, of course, will continue to collaborate as we move in advancing the rights and contributions of indigenous peoples in different avenues and spaces. So thank you, everyone, on behalf of the Right Energy Partnership, in behalf of Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, and the Indigenous Peoples Rights International. We hope that we will continue to engage with you in this important global issue. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day. Thank you.
Un abrazo, gracias a todos. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Gracias.
Thank you to all.
Thank you.